He went through, he did the research, he did the planning, and he carried it out. I submit to you that that aggravating factor of cold, calculated, and premeditated, highly premeditated, is proven beyond any reasonable doubt.
We break down the closing arguments and the conclusion of the Parkland school shooter penalty phase trial. Will the jury recommend life in prison or the death penalty? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. After almost 3 months, we have come to the end of the Parkland school shooting penalty phase trial. We are seeing the closing arguments in the trial of Nicholas Cruz. This is the 23-year-old man who opened fire at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School back in Valentine's Day in 2018. This is a man who's already pled guilty to 17 counts of murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. The jury in this case is not deciding his guilt. What they are deciding is his punishment. And that is a decision that is not an easy one, because they will either recommend life in prison or the death penalty. What they are supposed to do is do a weighing test. They weigh the aggravating factors that are put on by the state versus the mitigating factors that are put on by the defense. There is no exact science to this, but they're supposed to somehow do this kind of weighing test. It's nebulous, but that's what they do. And I will tell you, it's not an easy case for this jury. You know, you set aside the very difficult question of whether to sentence someone to death. Just think about everything that this jury has been through and what they've seen and heard. Testimony from victims, testimony from victim family members, mental health professionals. They even went on a visit of the crime scene, which I was told and which was reported as a very, very tough day. But now we are at the moment of the closing arguments. And this is the last attempt by both sides to convince this jury. Closing arguments are not evidence. They're a summation of everything that the jury saw, but it's an argument to the jury of why they should decide a certain way. Now, since this is the state's case, the prosecution goes first, and we started with prosecutor Michael Satz, focusing in on the aggravating factors by first walking the jury through, once again, the horrifying events of that day.
He shoots into Gina again, Martin again, and Luke again. And Gina, and you saw the photographs, you remember the testimony of Dr. Osborne, the medical examiner? He did the autopsy on Gina Montalvo. She was shot 4 times and she died of her wounds. But two of those wounds were contact wounds. Contact wounds, which means the end of that M&P 5.56 AR-15 style rifle was right up against her chest and right up on her abdomen. Right on her skin. She was shot 4 times and she died. And she also had what Dr. Osborne called a defensive wound. What's a defensive wound? When someone tries to protect themselves by raising their legs or their hands. Joaquin Oliver had one too, if you'll recall. Gina had a bullet that went through the back of her hand and came out her palm, as if holding up to protect herself. She had a contact wound of her chest and her abdomen. She died of her wounds. And you remember what one of the YouTube comments from Nicholas Cruz was? Remember? I don't mind shooting a girl in the chest. That's exactly what he did to Gina Montalvo.
Incredibly difficult to listen to. Always difficult to hear once again. And especially as you look at the parents and the loved ones of these victims in that gallery listening to this. And they've really been present for the entire trial. But I'll tell you what is amazing about Michael Satz here is that he presented, and he did the same thing with the opening statements, he presented all of this from his memory. No notes. This is somebody who's so invested in this case, so knowledgeable. To know that level of detail with no notes is incredibly impressive. And as you see, Satz is focusing in on this depraved nature of this event, the cold, premeditated aspect of this.
The defendant wrote on his YouTube were, "No mercy, no questions, double tap. I'm going to kill a shit ton of people and murder children." And on July the 4th, 2017, I love to see the families suffer. You're entitled and I suggest that every YouTube comment, every search, everything that's in evidence, you can review when you're deliberating.
But Satz also addressed the issue of mitigation. He didn't just focus on the aggravating factors. He focused on what the defense put forward, because the defense has argued that Cruz never got a chance at life, that he's somebody with serious mental illness, due partly to the fact that his mother his biological mother abused substances when she was pregnant with Nicholas, and they even cited fetal alcohol syndrome. And that's important when you consider the issue of impulse control. And Satz addressed this.
That the defendant does not have any neurocognitive deficits. And both Dr. Denny and Dr. Scott did not diagnose the defendant with any of the disorders that come under FASD, whether, and that's fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, whether it's NDPAE or ARND. They said that that wasn't part of their diagnosis. They didn't feel that was applicable. They felt he had antisocial personality and borderline personality disorder, and he was malingering. FASD and NDPAE and ARND certainly did not cause the defendant to abuse animals, to hate women, to have racist obsessions, or to cause him to murder 14 children and 3 of their caretakers on February the 14th, 2018. Obviously, the defendant has planning and reasoning abilities, because you saw that, all the planning and the research. How many people know about Jokelin High School in Finland, or all these mass murders? And the testimony certainly established that his testing and his performance and his abilities were at least consistent with someone with an 83 IQ. And he certainly is able to retain things, memory-wise, and replicate them.
And in the end, Satz wrapped all of this up in a very powerful way.
For Gina Montaldo, for Alex Schechter, for Luke Hoyer, for Martin Duque Aquilano, for Elena Petty, for Alyssa Alphadev, for Helena Ramsey, for Nicholas Durrett, for Carmen Shentrum, for Christopher Hickson, for Aaron Feiss, for Jamie Guttenberg, for Scott Beagle, for Kara Loughlin, for Meadow Pollock, for Joaquin Oliver, and for Peter Wang, the appropriate sentence for Nicholas Cruz is the death penalty. Thank you.
But now we move over to the defense, because the defense had an opportunity to respond, and this was part of their closing argument delivered by Melissa McNeil.
And he accepted responsibility for that. Choosing to kill is not an aggravating factor. It is not for your consideration when you are making your decision about whether or not he should live or die. He chose to kill, and he chose to plead guilty to those charges. It's easier to call somebody antisocial or borderline personality disorders than to accept what Nicholas Cruz really is. A broken, brain-damaged, mentally ill young man. And if we say that Nicholas is only antisocial or borderline personality disorder, then it's a Nicholas Cruz problem. But if we recognize what he really is, that damaged, brain-damaged, broken, mentally ill person, it becomes a human issue. And every human life has value. We are not saying that Nicholas doesn't have a personality disorder. We never have. What we are saying is that he also has FASD. He has both. And that is what the evidence has supported. You are about to make one of the most important decisions that you may ever make in your entire life. And you will never be able to change that decision. You will never be able to change your mind. And you will have to live with your decision for the rest of your life.
So by really focusing in on the mental health aspect, the defense is trying to say to the jury, consider this. Consider who you would be putting to death. Is that the right decision here? And they emphasize that this jury shouldn't make a decision based on emotion.
The state of Florida wants to put you in a place of hate and anger and vengeance. Because if that is where you're at, you are more likely to sentence that young man to death. And the law that we all live by tells jurors that we must not make decisions based on passion, emotion, or anger. Why? How many times have you made a decision based solely on anger and you later regretted it? One vote for life means the death penalty will not be imposed. Your individual moral decision must not be based upon what you think that this community wants or what you think anybody else wants. This is your individual moral decision. No one else's.
And she is 100% right. Even after all of this evidence, if one juror says no to the death penalty, that's it. That's life in prison. And in these kind of cases, it's very difficult to predict what the jury will come back with. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us once again here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. We'll speak to you next time.